This is Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 8. Yea, in the way of thy judgments, O Lord, have we waited for thee. The desire of our soul is to thy name, and to the remembrance of thee. With my soul have I desired thee in the night. Yea, with my spirit within me will I seek thee early. For when thy judgments are in the earth, the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah. And a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Aquath who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. All right, and I want to go into a lesson inspired by these two verses, with the point of the lesson being the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. All right, we live in a very dark and perverse world, where wickedness and ignorance is glorified, all right, and righteousness is demonized, and when you come into this truth, one of the comforting things that you hear, is that the Lord will give us as a nation of people rest. We will receive the kingdom as an inheritance, and as you mature in the spirit, you understand that the kingdom of heaven is more than meat and drink. It's more than the physical parts of having a kingdom, the bragging rights, if you will, of being the top nation, and it's beyond that. And it's more about the righteousness of Yahweh Shema Shai and the knowledge of the Lord covering the earth as the waters cover the sea. As a matter of fact, I want to get that. It's Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 9. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. We live in a world right now that lacks equity, that lacks integrity, you know, where corruption is rewarded, you know, um, abominations are put on pedestals, and righteousness is demonized. And the beauty of the kingdom of heaven is that the rulership not only benefits those who are ruling, but it also benefits those who are being ruled over. All right. This is Proverbs 29 and 2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. All right. And it reminds me of a quote from Plato. All right. And I want to bring that out real quick. It says this: unless, said I, either philosophers became kings in our states, or those whom we now call our kings and rulers take to the pursuit of philosophy seriously and adequately, and there is a conjunction of these two things, political power and philosophic intelligence, while the motley horde of the natures who at present pursue either apart from the other are compulsory excluded, there can be no cessation of troubles, dear Glaucon, for our states, nor I fancy for the human race either. All right. And basically, he's talking about the fact that those who are oftentimes in rulership are not wise. All right. And the chief example of that, all right, is Esau, Edom, the so called white man. As a nation of people, they've been given power, but Esau, Edom, as a nation of people, are not wise. And really, when you look at wisdom, all right, wisdom really only dwells with the nation of Israel, and we'll get that, Lord willing. That is a part of the inheritance of the nation of Israel. This is why the wisdom that's being presented now through the laborers of the elect, beginning with our apostles and elders, Lord willing, we be a part of that number, is so shocking to this world, because this world has accepted wickedness as prudence. But when you look at what Plato's saying in this quote, ultimately it's really a desire for righteous rulership. And that's what the kingdom of heaven entails: righteous rulership. All right, really quick, let's get this. This is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 6 and 24. In the GNT, it says, no, indeed, the more wise people there are, the safer the world will be. A sensible king, a sensible king can be depended on to give his people this kind of security. All right. And that sensible king is the one the world ignorantly calls Jesus, whose name is Yahweh Shai. And through his rulership, the world or the inhabitants of the world will learn righteousness. As the scriptures say, the law shall go forth from Zion. So the laws that are demonized in this society are going to be enforced. And then the results of that enforcement is going to make people understand that this is the proper way. I'll give you an example. One of the easiest examples, right, is the laws concerning marriage. The laws and the punishments concerning breaking a marriage or committing adultery. The committing of adultery results in the woman and the man being put to death. All right. And when you think about how that would affect in a society, if people saw the consequence of those type of deeds, you'd see divorce go down dramatically. Understanding the sanctity of marriage, what it's actually meant for, leads to a better society overall. Another example is the dietary law. There's a over farming, if you will, or over harvesting of oysters. All right. The slaughter of pigs. All right. The harvesting of lobsters and shrimp. These are animals that are meant to, as scavengers, clean the earth, whether it be the sea or the actual earth when you deal with pigs. They're not meant for consumption. A lot of health issues derive from uh, the violation of the dietary law. All right. And these are examples of the earth not knowing righteousness and the cost of it. All right. This is Isaiah chapter 24 and 5. All right. Matter of fact, let's get this in the NLT. All right. It says, the earth suffers for the sins of its people, for they have twisted God's instructions, violated his laws, and broken his everlasting covenant. In those two examples, even the land having a Sabbath, all right, prevents over the topsoil being eroded and people not actually having the minerals needed in their food to sustain their health. It goes beyond the 10 commandments. All right. Another example is the year of Jubilee. All right. As a matter of fact, I was doing some research on the year of Jubilee, just kind of casually with Chat GPT. And I'll bring this out real quick. All right. So it says, the year of Jubilee is a central institution in the law of Moses, described primarily in Leviticus, the 25th chapter. It is both an economic reset and a theological proclamation that Israel belongs to the Lord. All right. When is the year of Jubilee? It occurs every 50th year. All right. But let me hit some of the points. It shows how, and I want to hit these points to show how, if you imagine this being enforced in the earth globally, what kind of implications it has. You think about how great the system the Lord set up in the law, statutes, and commandments is when you live in a society like this and then you see a law like this. All right, let's go through it. It says liberty is proclaimed. All right, it says this includes Israelite indentured servants are freed, families separated by debt servitude are reunited. All right, this does not refer to chattel slavery, but to temporary debt servitude. All right, so if you were in debt that 50th year, it was reset. All right, meaning the debts were cleared. All right, it says land returns to original families. All right, ye shall return every man unto his possession. All right, going back to when the land was allotted to the nation of Israel, the respective tribes, and then those individuals within those respective tribes. Every 50 years, you could sell your land, but after those 50 years were up, that land goes back to that family. All right, so there's no ability to have a monopoly. All right, real quick. Agricultural reset says just like the sabbatical year, no sowing or reaping for profit. People live off what grows naturally. Trusting God's provision is required. All right, debts are functionally cleared. While the sabbatical year every 7 years addresses debt release, Jubilee ensures Long-term debt cycles cannot last indefinitely. No family is trapped forever by past misfortune. Now, these are the type of laws that are going to be implemented in the kingdom of heaven. All right. I just want to touch on some of those as I continue. All right, we're gonna go to Wisdom of Solomon again, the sixth chapter, but I'm gonna start up at verse 20. All right, it says the this desire for wisdom can prepare you to rule a kingdom. So then you that rule the nations, if you value your thrones and symbols of authority, honor wisdom that ye may rule forever. All right, and that's very ironic through the spirit, because on this side we don't have the symbols of authority, that comes with being the sons of God. And that's because at this point, the Lord is perfecting wisdom in the vessels of the elect. Lord willing, we be a part of that number. Because ultimately, wisdom bringeth to a kingdom. And in that kingdom, the earth will learn righteousness. Like right now, we're approaching the time of judgment, which means the world will learn a certain level of righteousness through the judgments. But in the kingdom of heaven, as the laws are enforced, people are going to truly understand the value of walking in the ways of the Lord. All right. This is why you go to Isaiah, the second chapter, it says this. All right. Isaiah 2:2. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And this shows you that the law is not done away with, because this is a future prophecy. All right, this shows you that in the kingdom of heaven, the nations are going to say amongst each other. All right. It says, and many people shall go and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and he will teach us of his ways. All right. And that's very different from the lot of the Israelites, because we know when you go to Hebrews, the 8th chapter, concerning the new covenant, what did the Lord say? All right. This is Hebrews 8:10. It says, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. So that's very different from what we see in Isaiah, the second chapter, which shows you there is a separation between the nation of Israel and the other nations. They will have to learn righteousness through what? Through the priesthood, which at this point now is the nation, the men of the nation of Israel. In the old covenant, it was just the Levites. But in the new covenant, under the priesthood of Melchizedek or Malak Tazadok, all men of Israel become eligible to be priests, which was the goal in the first place. All right, this is Exodus 19:6. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. All right, not just the Levites, which shows you that the Lord always intended for us as a nation of people to be that intercessor. Just like we've always had an intercessor between us and the Lord, in the kingdom of heaven, our nation is going to be an intercessor between the nations and Yahweh Shem Shai as priests. And through that, we'll be able to teach them the ways of Yahweh Shem Shai, because in the kingdom, we will be made perfect, meaning the laws will be in us the same way. We don't have to tell our heart to beat and our lungs to draw air and to release carbon dioxide. The laws are going to be in us, and we will be made perfect, which will set us up to be perfect judges in the earth, perfect priests in the earth, which is a perfect priesthood. All right. And that is the balance. When you look at the equity discussed in the scriptures, is that through that rulership, the other nations are going to have the privilege of having perfect judges, unbiased judges who cannot be corrupted. And through that, the law, statutes, and commandments going forth from Zion, the world will learn righteousness. Not only that, they will appreciate it. All right. What we see happening in the earth right now is the complete opposite. And this is why the world is in a state of mourning, because Esau Edom has authority in the world today, but he doesn't have any understanding. All right. Real quick. This is in Proverbs. I'm going to go to Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 16. It says, "The prince that wanteth understanding is also a great oppressor, but he that hateth covetousness shall prolong his days." All right. And we live in a society that is truly built upon covetousness. All right. This whole desiring of what someone else has, this spirit of competition, desiring another man's life, his wife, his gifts, whatever the case may be. That's the type of society Esau pushes forth into the earth. And they call it capitalism, but it's really just covetousness by another word, incentivizing greed. Well, in the kingdom of heaven, equity is going to be exercised. All right, but this is highlighting the prince that wanteth understanding is a great oppressor. All right, let's get this in the NLT. It's going to highlight it again. It says, "A ruler with no understanding will oppress his people, but one who hates corruption will have a long life." All right, and this describes Esau Edom, all right, in so many words. And the benefit of the kingdom of heaven for the other nations is that they're going to have the privilege of having righteous rulers. All right, this is Psalms 122 and 5. All right, it says, "For there are set thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David." All right. So as a nation of people under Yahweh Shai, because ultimately it's his kingdom, the law, statutes, and commandments are going to be enforced in the earth. All right. Because again, it takes me back to, as you first hear this truth, you have this very simple understanding of the kingdom. You think about the buildings, the how it's described with the jewels in the streets with gold, being able to live forever, being at rest. But then as you mature, you start to understand the value of the law, statutes, and commandments being enforced in the earth and having the privilege of watching the law, statutes, and commandments being enforced and changing the world that we see today into its intended meaning. Being able to see the earth in its full potential with the law, statutes, and commandments being executed in the earth. Seeing equity prosper in the earth. Seeing the law, statutes, and commandments enforced and the people being able to recognize the value in this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. All right, this is Deuteronomy 4 and 5. It says, "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord Yahweh Shai, our God, is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that has statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day?" And after that 1,000 years of captivity, the nations are going to come to this conclusion. They're going to realize certain animals are not considered food. All right. They're going to realize that the land needs a Sabbath. That you have to allow the land to replenish its topsoil. So you don't need supplements. That everything in the earth isn't considered food. That covetousness is off. The spirit of competing with your brethren is off. And these are things that is going to come natural over time as these laws, statutes, and commandments are enforced in the earth. Because right now we live in a direct opposite of a world ruled in righteousness. All right. We don't see equity going forth in this world. We see oppression. All right. There's Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 8. It says, "If thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field." All right. And Yahweh Shai, all right, is going to facilitate that equity in the earth. All right. And equity doesn't mean everybody gets the equal share. All right. Equity is more about fairness than anything. All right. In the kingdom of heaven, there's not going to be a finesse. All right. False weights, false balances. All right. The ability to use your authority to abuse it. These are things that are not going to be common in the kingdom of heaven. Of course, the nations are still going to go off, but then the law, statutes, and commandments are going to be enforced. And whatever consequence falls on them, it'll fall on them. But through this practice, through the law, statutes, and commandments being perfected and enforced in the earth, I mean, we can only imagine, what it will look like, all right, once it actually manifests itself in the kingdom of heaven. Imagining the kingdom of heaven 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 years later, it's it's damn near impossible to imagine that. But we know through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shah that it will be light years greater than the world we live in today. All right, which brings me back to this. Let's go here. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 4. And it reads, the power of the earth is in the hand of the Lord, and in due time he will set over it one that is profitable. All right. And we all know, all right, for those who don't, but we all know that that is Yahweh Shai, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus. That is the one who's profitable. And through that government, the world is going to learn righteousness. And this is why that kingdom will never be destroyed. All right, because it's going to be established on righteousness. All right. Let me get that real quick. This is Proverbs chapter 16 and 12. It is an abomination to kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness. All right. So Yahweh Shai's throne is never going to be diminished. All right. He's going to rule forever. That's because it's established on righteousness. And the world is going to learn righteousness through that government being implemented and the law, statutes, and commandments being enforced in the earth. And I mentioned some of the smaller examples like food and relationships, but when you think about the land Sabbath, the debt release, all right, how you deal with children, all right, marriages, all right, marriages with multiple women. There's the law, statutes, and commandments cover all facets of life, and it's pro-life. Most importantly, we live in a world that is anti-life, all right, and it's because of who's in rulership. All right, matter of fact, let's go back here. There's Ecclesiastes 10 and 2. As the judge of the people is himself, so are his officers. And what manner of man the ruler of the city is, such are all they that dwell therein. Imagine a world where most people are trying to be like Yahweh Shai, as opposed to Esau. Imagine a world where people look up to Yahweh Shai. All right. Way more than they look up to a Jay-Z or a Lil Wayne or Michael Jackson. Imagine a world like, that saying back in the day when Michael Jordan was in his prime, I want to be like Mike. Imagine a world where the slogan is, I want to be like Yahweh Shai. Not just from the Israelites, but the other nations, because again, the Israelites are going to be made perfect and we're going to be made perfect in the kingdom. So imagine a world where these other nations, the same way they copy you, Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and the things that you do in your folly, imagine them modeling themselves after us as a nation of people when we've been made righteous. Lord willing, we be a part of that number. This is why Isaiah, the 2nd chapter, says what it says. They're going to say amongst themselves, let us go to the house of Jacob. All right, to the God of Jacob. All right, and learn of his ways. All right, matter of fact, let's get that in the GNT. Here's Isaiah chapter 2 and 3. And it says, and their people will say, let us go up the hill of the Lord to the temple of Israel's God. He will teach us what he wants us to do. We will walk in the paths he has chosen. For the Lord's teaching comes from Jerusalem. From Zion, he speaks to his people. All right. So the world is going to learn this righteousness, all right, through that righteous government. And the head of that government is Yahweh Shai under Yahweh. All right. And through that, the world is going to learn righteousness. Not only that, there's going to come a point in time where they're going to realize it's the right way to go. And they're going to be just as zealous in enforcing it amongst their people. Man, just imagining that is going to be a beautiful thing through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shai. All right. So I just want to touch that through the spirit. Lord willing, this was edifying with that. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, or the elders of Yasha Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwad who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. Shalom.